But
Yeah.
anyway, so Coach Isabel Valle, by the way, she gave me a lot of exercise to reflect about my values, what do I care about. And one of the questions which I encourage everyone to ask yourself, especially if you're trying to consider entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
is if you have $100 million today, how would you spend it,
Mhm.
right?
Hey, listeners, this is Alex, your host of EOA Entrepreneurs of Asia. After more than a decade of venture building, bootstrapping, scaling, and now investing in Southeast Asia, I sit down with founders, investors, and entrepreneurs who share their hard earned lessons and stories for the benefit of the Asia ecosystem and beyond. Today's episode is part two of Nattapak's journey. Previously, in part one, we got to know about Nattapak and what the Bangkok experience is like, along with Nattapak's formative years that set him up to launching ventures in Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. In part two, we get to learn about what it is actually like to work in these three countries and the major and minor differences amongst them. If you're new to building in Philippines, Indonesia, or Thailand, this is worth listening to. We also explore some of the mindset differences between the East and the West. And lastly, Nattapak shares some wisdom that is useful for all entrepreneurs, whether they are early on their journey or already seasoned entrepreneurs. The $100 million question. This question has led Nattapak to founding his current startup, Trash Lucky. If you're ready to learn, let's dive in and listen. And then you started in Thailand, and then you ended up moving to Indonesia for what, close to 4 years, right?
I think it was 2.5 years, something like that.
2.5 years. What were some of the differences that you noticed then between the Thai market in this, in the startup ecosystem versus the Indonesia startup scene?
I don't even know where to start. Um, if we talk about the market first, I feel
Yeah.
like people in Indonesia were actually more willing to try uh, new services and from
Ah,
startups,
interesting.
like
Okay.
than Thailand. Because like I feel like in Thailand, um, people are pretty complacent with the routine, right? So like
Mm,
even if you come in and you say, "Hey, this is better," but if they have to like think about making a switch and like if the switch is gonna cost them just even like a small pain or work, they're
yeah.
probably not gonna do it.
Interesting.
But like I felt like for Indonesia, it was easier. And this is just to give you some context. This is like the B2B, okay? So
B2B. Okay,
not
B2B.
not
Oh, interesting.
B2C.
Okay. Not B2C.
Yeah. And
Okay.
people in Indonesia actually speaks more English than Thai.
Ah, interesting.
Um, so for me as a foreigner, it was much easier to have meetings with like logistic manager, warehouse manager in English. Um,
Yeah.
but if I were to reflect back in Thailand, it's probably very, very difficult.
Mm.
I don't think warehouse manager, logistic manager in Thailand would be able to hold like meeting in English.
So would you say that it's easier to do business in Indonesia or Thailand? And we're talking about starting a business, getting electricity, registering property, getting credit, getting trade, enforcing contracts, this kind of stuff, which is like on the ease to do business index rankings, right? That's what they kind of consider. What do you think? Which one's easier?
Thailand is definitely easier. Just to give a little background, I wasn't really involved in the process of setting up the company in Indonesia. So
Okay.
my job at delivery was pretty much like after Thailand was pretty much like to scale up the market after Tom
Mm.
has started it. Tom and I were both in Thailand, um, and I was building and heading delivery. Now, while he was still very involved in Inspire Venture and all the
Yeah.
portfolio companies, um, and then later when Inspire Ventures decide to make a full switch to like the venture builder, Tom essentially like switched uh, his time from Inspire Ventures like VC
Yeah.
to heading delivery itself. His job then was to launch new market. So while I was still in Thailand, he then would move to Indonesia to get everything
Mm.
launched, right? All the
I
legal,
see.
all the structure,
Yeah.
all the paperwork, and get off the ground running. And then once it's up to a certain point, then I came in and then built on that. As far as setting up companies go in Indonesia, I can only tell you from like secondhand like stories. But I know that
Yeah.
like, for example, like foreigners can't like set up the companies on their own there. You need like nominees kind of thing, even though it's kind of
Yeah.
illegal. So
Mm,
like you need to have like a someone that you trust, right? That
yeah.
um, and if you were kind of like on your own, then that's gonna be don't have any connection, and that's gonna be very difficult too. So definitely
Yeah.
Thailand is easier. It's definitely easier to open up business in Thailand than Indonesia.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way probably in Vietnam is very similar to Indonesia that I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward process to set up, but if you attract enough a certain attention, you need the right connection to make sure you know how to navigate it, or it does get interesting. I would say, it gets a little bit more complicated for your business. But it's not to say like right, everything once you're set up, the running itself is pretty straightforward. And I don't know, maybe that seems to be true across the board. Unless we're, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, and probably Thailand. I guess if just a pure setup is probably very easy for a foreigner, I guess, right?
I haven't set up in Malaysia or Singapore,
Yeah,
so I can't speak to it.
yeah. I mean, I will. I've done both. Actually, in all those markets, I've probably started companies, and it's definitely very easy. Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam was easy only because we had the right person. When we went, when we first launched Rocket Vietnam, it was Oliver Samware. This meeting, he somehow found these two lawyers, and it was just down to everyone in the room pointing which guy they liked, and we just happened to pick the right American Vietnamese guy, which ended up working really well because very competent lawyer, and he knew the right people and the authorities, and so it's much easier. Which is, if you pick that wrong person, it could be very messy, I think, but that's not really an issue in the other countries that I've worked in. So. Um, for the Thai tech scene, then I heard that talent now is all getting sucked up into crypto. Is that true?
Probably. I think I think that's more like a global trend, not just like a local trend.
Well, do you think the Thai? I feel like it's like you said, switching costs are somewhat higher. You're saying for a B2B sense, but maybe also in a B2C sense, right? Because we saw Gojek exiting the market, selling it to AirAsia. It seems that Line was very hard to displace. The Line app, which had really big moat for other people to try to come in and chip away at it, but it was very hard. Lala Move kind of just built off of it, right? So they kind of just extend the ecosystem. It seems that would you say that the Thai tech ecosystem is unique, and that it has a kind of different flavor than what you saw in other countries that you worked from Indonesia or other parts in the region?
I definitely think while it has a lot of similarities, it also have its own like uniqueness. I think in the
Yeah,
contrast, like in the easiest contrast in the three markets that I've been in, Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines. So I was in Philippines for
yeah.
almost half a year, I think, before I left
Okay,
delivery.
wow.
Philippines to me was like the easiest market um, to grow because their their existing options are just so not good. It's just like so horrible. Like their traditional options. So as long as you come in and you don't suck, you will grow. As long as you come in and you give good
Interesting.
service,
Yeah,
you will grow. Like because
yeah.
like even though there's like a big dominant player traditional there, um, the market is fragmented and the service quality, the service level is much lower. So like it ended up being like the easiest market to launch versus Thailand.
Hmm.
I think people value that relationship too. Like oh
Yeah.
like I've been doing this business with like this
Hmm.
people for
True.
so long. I don't have
Yeah.
that much like reason to switch. Like I like this current
Safe.
business partner. So
Yeah.
I like this current sales guy. Like yeah, so why change?
With really bad talent, that's a really hard problem to displace and fix, I guess. So that's an interesting point.
I think that would be one comment
Okay.
that I saw.
So for the last question on this section, then, what are some? I mean, hopefully, don't ruffle too many feathers, but what are some stereotypes do you think that hold true for Thailand, or maybe that are false that people, um, keep thinking about or mentioning?
I think the stereotype, if you talk about stereotypes, it's probably pretty common around um, like Southeast Asia versus kind of like the Western culture, right? Like
Yeah.
um, in the workforce, you kind of have to get people to express their opinions and voice their concerns. Like bad news that will travel up, right? And like
Yeah.
and even like opinions don't even uh, get really brainstorm all that much in the meeting room. So what I'm saying is
Mm.
like comparing Western culture to East Southeast Asia, it definitely takes uh manager to drive the meeting and get opinions out of your staff, right? I think the only exception is well, I don't know if it's only, but like one exception is the Philippines. Uh, I think the Philippines are kind of been groomed with the BPO's industry and kind of the US style, like kind of work culture. So I think they're kind of more vocal in meetings. And like if you're used to that style of wanting to get opinions of key people or like your teams before you make the decision, working in Southeast Asia, it just requires a little bit more effort in that aspect.
That's a really fascinating point because you had quite a long experience working in the US, so maybe you're better qualified to say, but my opinion on what you're saying is that it's more of a people problem, not a cultural or regional problem where, especially in early stage where the founder has to kind of or the leader has to lead the meeting and really force opinions out of people because I've run into that problem many times. And I kind of thought it was more around culture, but maybe I'm wrong because the people who've really spoken up in meetings that I've run were kind of exposed to Western culture. They either studied there or they were kind of raised in the kind of way. So maybe there's something for me to think more about, and it is beyond just a people problem. Because I thought in U.S. like I always think it's an Asian problem, but I thought maybe in U.S. it would literally be the same way. So I don't know. What was your experience in U.S.? Was this really something that like in the U.S. you had no problem? Everyone's just contributing to meetings, or do you think there's more of this personal element?
Well, I think, you know, um, in a meeting room anywhere around the world, you'll obviously have like people who are less vocal and
Yeah,
people who are more vocal,
yeah,
right? But I
true.
feel like in Southeast Asia, I run into many occasions where nobody's vocal, right? So it's like, okay, what do you guys think? And it's silent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I think, of course, like everywhere around the globe, um, people is always afraid to be the first one to speak up.
okay,
So
yeah,
you have
okay,
that a little bit of pause, right, of silence
yeah,
before
yeah,
someone speaks up. But I think at least in the Western culture, um, uh, if nobody speaks up, someone will have that urge and say, "Oh, you know what? I have an opinion. Let me be supportive of someone who
mm,
asks a question." Right? So
yeah,
we don't sit in like this awkward silence,
yeah,
versus what I found in Southeast Asia. There's more instances of we just go in silence, and then the team leader will have to be like, okay, asking again, does anyone have opinion? There'll be silence again, and you kind of like, okay, I have an opinion. You have to like
yeah,
say your opinion
yeah,
first, right? And then
yeah, yeah, yeah,
then room may be like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, nod around, and then I agree, So
yeah,
you'll kind of have to um, drive and give example of your opinion as well. But like there's good and bad in that one, right? Because sometimes then you wonder like, well, what if I haven't shared my opinion first? Would they have agreed with
yeah,
that, or
correct.
would they have thought something else, right?
Yeah. I mean, do you think it's due to institutionalized spoon feeding? like this whole idea of just rote memorization, take tests, pump and dump, and they don't really focus on the critical thinking aspect growing up in the schooling system. Because I'm not saying people can't do critical thinking here. That's obviously not true, but it's whether or not you want to voice it up, or are you waiting for a superior to give you instructions? Do you think that's like an institutionalized problem in the culture?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a culture thing because
Yeah.
remember, like I grew up here and
Yeah. Correct.
uh, I
Yeah.
went I went to school here up until seventh grade. Sorry,
Yeah.
Thai school until sixth grade, international school 1 year before I went to the US. And in Thai
Mm.
school, you literally, even though it was like one of the best private school in Thailand, but the culture is still there where if you ask questions, you may get punished because
Hmm.
when you
Interesting.
ask questions, then teacher assume that you're not paying attention, and not paying
Yeah.
attention is wrong. If you had paid attention, then you would have understand.
Yeah.
You would have understood, and you wouldn't ask question, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes teacher would even take it a step further, where okay, why'd you ask questions? You didn't pay attention. Come up here, and then they spank you right in front of class with a stick.
Oh wow, hardcore.
Yeah. So it's like, well, the culture is like you actually get punished to ask questions, right?
Yeah.
You're just supposed to sit in silence and listen and memorize and take notes. That's all you're supposed to
Yeah.
do, right? If you
Yeah.
question, even if you understood, but you saw like a different alternatives, you're not allow or you're not encouraged to debate, right? So that was
Hmm.
definitely one of the things that I had to get used to when I went to high school in the US. Because like,
Hmm.
like in Western education system, you're encouraged to like discuss, you're encouraged to voice your
Yeah.
opinion. And I was
Yeah.
definitely like one of the most silent like student in class because I had the language barrier
Mm.
and B, I had the culture barrier. I'm not used to like voicing
Yeah.
my opinion. I
Mm.
think that my opinion is not important because I never
Yeah.
voiced my opinion like in Thai school. Like this is weird to
Yeah.
me.
That makes me really think hard about my own actions, behavior living here in the past 10 years. I think no matter wherever I went, I probably was just that loud, annoying American who just kept voicing my opinion, especially in the context of work, like building ventures and this kind of thing. Which I mean, I think is important at that level. You need to kind of have that. Otherwise, you really don't move anywhere. And a lot of my leadership initiatives have to be around mentoring critical thought, asking why, getting people to go beyond what they're usually comfortable with. So that's a pretty fresh perspective, and I think that's a very good point. That it's I just don't know that context, but when you tell it to me, a lot of things make more sense all of a sudden in my past history.
And it's still like this today, like
Yeah,
Thai
yeah,
school.
true.
So unless there's a big reform, then
Yeah,
like
yeah,
people will be used to this. Like it's only those who grown up and break the habit, and then
yeah,
they become more vocal and comfortable. It's not
yeah.
like all Thais are like this, of
Of
course
course,
not.
of course, of course.
Okay,
We're
like
not doing a mass generalization.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to move to the last section about, I think your journey transitioning from delivery into what you're doing now, Trash Lucky, is quite interesting because you kind of took a year off, right?
Actually, yeah, maybe almost a year.
Yeah.
You're right.
You had long corporate experience being an engineer. Then you kind of started running a family business. And then after that, you did your first startup with Easy Taxi. Then you do your second startup and you scale it successfully across a few countries because delivery is still running today and still fighting in the logistics space. Um, so that's kind of where you're at your journey. So you probably wanted to, what were your thoughts? Like you wanted to take pause to figure out what to do. I remember we had met in Bali that time with all the old Easy Taxi gang, and you were just thinking about starting something in recycling because of your experience in surfing, right? So what happened during that 1 year? What was that journey like? And what kind of exercise did you do to figure out, I want to do Trash Lucky?
So when I joined delivery, my goal was to build it from uh, zero, to build from scratch,
Yeah.
and get it to Series A, and then leave to do my own startups.
Okay.
Um, so that's what I did. Like once, although like I told myself that it would take 2 years to get there.
Yeah.
In reality, it took 3 years.
Yeah.
But in reality, it always takes longer than.
Of course.
So after having raised Series A, I told myself that I reached my goal. So I should think about what what venture I would want to build of my own.
Yeah.
Uh, and being in startups, like it's really firefighting every day.
Yeah.
So you don't really have time to reflect and think about what is important to you, what kind of business you want to build.
Mm.
Like what are you into? What are you put on earth to do? What is your purpose?
Yeah.
You don't have time to reflect because in the next day you are worrying about, a key client and then, you gotta go pitch to the next potential clients. Um, and then, your fulfillment drop because it rained, like all these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm never gonna find my new venture if I tell myself that I can moonlight and think about the next idea while I'm at a startup. Like that's just dreaming. That's just a dream. So um, if I really want to do my own startups, I need to take a break. I need to stop everything and focus on soul searching almost, right? Like
Yeah.
finding the calling. Um, so it wasn't an easy decision because, like I've always having like one job after the other,
Yeah.
knowing exactly like if I quit this job, what is my next job, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then at that moment, it was like, if I quit this job and I don't find what I want to do, will I be like jobless forever? Like I don't want to be jobless forever, right? So it it
Yeah.
was it was it was a critical like decision to make, but yeah, eventually I came to realize the point that I just said. It's like, okay, if I don't quit now, I would definitely be at delivery for the next 3 years, like another
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah. Correct.
So I just like I just balls up and just say I just have to quit
Yeah.
and think that I will find something that I want to do. If I
Yeah.
don't give myself time, I will never find that path.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I worked until the very last day before I need to jump on the plane to my NCAA reunion in France.
Nice.
um, I literally left work and then went to the airport. Um,
Bye.
Startup style.
Yeah.
and and yeah, like it was a nice break. Of course, like you were still like in shock where like, oh wait, I don't have a job to go to. I don't need to reply emails
Yeah.
while I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
Like that's weird. Like
Yeah.
I'm always used to replying emails while I'm on vacation,
Yeah.
replying WhatsApp, whatever. And then, I just kind of went traveling with my girlfriend in Europe for a bit and then came back to Thailand. And of course, like I love surfing, so I wanted to go live in Bali for a couple of months
Hmm.
and basically just do some self-reflection. Like it's like a soul-searching trip.
Yeah.
Um, just some time to decompress, basically.
Yeah.
When I was about to go to Bali, a um, a volcano there has just erupted. All my flight got canceled. And this was like 2018, I think. And then my friend, my INSEAD friend, who she's very smart, one of the smartest person I've met, had worked with actually a leadership coach. And of course, like for me, I always thought that leadership coach is something stupid. That's like bullshit, doesn't do anything. But having like a person that I respected and consider as very smart recommended something, it really changed my perspective as well. It's like, oh well, if Stephanie really think highly of what the leadership coach could help her, maybe it's good time to like for me to engage this leadership coach as well. And like I met her and we talk about like what she can help me with. And I think one of the benefits of hiring her was she kept me on track, right? Like
Mm.
um, it wasn't like about me just kind of going to Bali and have like endless surfing time
Yeah.
and not like concentrate on self-reflection at all. But
Do actual
having
work.
her there, exactly. She like
Yeah.
give me assignments of
Self-work.
self-reflection
Yeah.
and like, yeah, put me on schedule.
Yeah.
So I'm confident that uh, that I will actually spend time and work on those things and not just go surfing all day and not thinking about anything.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
then 3 years later, I'm like a surf bum in Bali. You know?
Yeah.
Um,
A very possible
so
outcome.
yeah, exactly in Bali, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that was a very, very good decision as well. And of course, by luck, if the volcano hadn't happened and it didn't give time for me to see my friend, then maybe that coach wouldn't come up. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Coach Isabel Valle, by the way, she gave me a lot of exercise to reflect about my values, what do I care about. And one of the questions which I encourage everyone to ask yourself, especially if you're trying to consider entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
is if you have $100 million today, how would you spend it,
Hmm.
right? Um, and of course, like, you may think that, well, you probably think that, well, I probably wouldn't spend $100 million on one thing. I would probably like, divide it up into like investment. I would divide up, maybe give some to parents, maybe buy a house, whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Unless you're Elon
Um,
Musk.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But but if you had like a bunch of ideas and like this entrepreneurship dream, one of the things you'll probably would be thinking is like, what problem can this money solve,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
And that's definitely uh where my head went. and and then spending a lot of time in the ocean, even before that Bali trip, you see a lot of plastic waste in the ocean, right?
Yeah.
You're basically swimming in it.
Hmm.
Um, and it's really painful to see that, because when you go to Indonesia and you go to a small island in Indonesia, um, for example, like Sumba, uh, an island of I think 750,000 people, but it's pretty big, right?
Yeah. It's like a
But
city.
yeah, it's a decent sized island
Yeah.
with you know, not that many people on it, less than a million.
Yeah.
But literally, like, we drove along the coast to travel, and literally, like, all along the road, you see plastic trash everywhere,
Mm.
even where there's nobody there, So
Yeah.
you just like, oh my God, we are literally like trashing the earth and the
Hmm.
ocean, like with all this waste. So this problem about the plastic waste has always been in the back of my mind. So when I had to reflect about how would I use $100 million today, that problem, or addressing the ocean plastic pollution, definitely was one of the key idea that came back to me. Like,
Yeah.
um, and it wasn't trash lucky then. Like, I didn't have like the it's never like that, right? Like, the
Yeah.
ideas doesn't just comes up with a snap finger.
Of
It
course.
took months to like come up with that, right? Like, at
Yeah.
first I was thinking, how do I come up with a um, marine degradable plastic?
Yeah.
So, like, all these packaging um, uh, a lot of time ends up in the waterways when it's not discarded properly, and then the waterways, of course, lead to the ocean. So what if you can come up with a packaging that can degrade by itself in the ocean, in the water? Then, maybe that solves the problem.
Yeah.
I spent months like researching about material science, like packaging,
Engineer
um,
background.
yeah, chemical engineering. Of course, like, it was like very, very dull and boring research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it did open up, like, many
Mm.
connections as
Yeah.
well, right? And organizations that are also working to address this problem.
Hmm.
So then when you make that kind of progress through your research, then you think, okay, I'm not that crazy. Like
Yeah.
there are other people who are solving this problem as well. I just didn't know about them. I didn't know they exist, but
Yeah.
those people
Correct.
exist, and there's like a big community about this. I found my tribe.
Yeah.
So then you're like, okay, maybe if this big nonprofit, global nonprofit are working on this, then it's definitely a important enough problem to solve. So that's what I started with. How to come up with a marine degradable plastic from that question, $100 million. How would you spend it? And I try to convince many material scientists to basically join the quest,
Yeah.
and they were just like, you're crazy. Like, who's this one dude calling me from Thailand, and like the guy from Germany, um, like, hey, we're gonna go raise fund, and we're gonna do R&D, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna come up with a prototype that we can launch in like 2 years, 3 years, and then we go
Yeah.
raise more fund and do this. And I spent like, I don't know, I think at least 2, 3 months after that initial research. When we met in Bali was when I was still going through that self-reflection process, and then thinking about which path to take, and like uh, finding clarity, right? Like
Yeah.
um, how to align my head, my heart, and my gut, right? Like
Yeah.
if you can align those three, brain, then you find that clarity.
Yeah.
But it takes time. So that's what Bali was all about. It was what working with my coach is all about. And when we met in Bali, I was still going through that process, but I was almost at the very end, right? Like I was already like very certain that's probably the the problem that I want to solve.
Yeah.
Um, so after that, after I left Bali, after I found that clarity, I left Bali, contact those scientists, and then they thought I was crazy. So then I went back to the drawing board. Like, okay, I just spent 2, 3 months, like pitching to this idea, and people thought I'm crazy because I'm not like a big conglomerate like
Yeah.
Dow Chemical, like who's gonna solve this problem, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I was like, okay, what do I know, and uh, what impact can I start today? What
Yeah.
is the supply chain is like? Um, so that marine degradable plastic was starting at the beginning of the supply chain, changing the materials, changing the packaging, changing the chemical compound, the structure,
Yeah.
right? But then what happens in the supply chain after that? Consumer use the packaging, consumer discarded. Um, if they discard it properly, then it goes to recycling. If they don't discard properly, then it goes into the environment
Yep.
mostly, right? So I'm like, oh, well, maybe I can work at the back end. What about
Mm.
stopping people from throwing all these recyclables away
Yeah.
in the environment and in the landfill? And then I started research more. And one day I came across city Surabaya that allows people to um, to exchange plastic bottles for a bus fare. And I thought
Yeah.
that's wow, that's a very creative idea of getting people to recycle.
This is in Indonesia,
But
right?
the limit, yeah, exactly. But the limitation is that you need public transportation for that model to work. If you don't have public transportation, then what, people are just not going to recycle? What happens in like small rural suburbs
Yeah.
where
Correct.
there's no like public bus?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, maybe we can turn recyclable trash into something else. So then I just kept thinking, and one day it just clicked. It was right before Christmas, I remember, um, and it just clicked. That like, oh my God, Thai people love lottery. Like
Yeah.
2 out of 7, or 20 million Thais spend 8.3 billion US dollar a year on lottery.
Wow.
So if we can turn this recyclable waste into lottery tickets, maybe people will change the perception
Mm.
of the value of this material, because all of a sudden there's one piece of plastic may make them a millionaire,
Yeah.
right? So then I was like, wow, this is a very powerful idea. So then I start like asking around, bouncing idea of people, and everyone like, wow, that's very creative. I went to I went to DTAC Accelerate Info session just by chance. Having like built companies before, I didn't think I would need go to accelerator, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, well, I mean, I'm not working free. Why don't I just go there just
Yeah.
to hear what they do? Um, and then just by luck, I met an ex-colleague at Easy Taxi after not having talked to him for 5 years.
Small world.
And yeah, and then we got to catch up, and he was like, "Oh my God, like I want to do something in waste management as well." So I think that was April 2019.
Yeah.
And then we were like, okay, why don't we set up a meeting next week? And then that's it. And then we basically say, okay, let's work together. And then we went to a month later, we went to pitch at DTAC Accelerator. We end up taking the first place of the practice pitching round,
Yeah.
which earns you like a fast track to the final pitching day.
Mm.
And then we got in the program, and then we were like, okay, I guess we now have to form a company.
Yeah.
So so yeah, so basically like along the way there's like a validation, right? Like,
Yeah.
can I sell this idea? What do people think about this idea? We did interviews of people, we did interview of the waste collector, basically like do all the research, right? Like
Yeah.
talk to as many people as we can. And that DTAC Australia incubator really got us to commit as well because they would invest, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Um, and help us as register a company as well.
Mhm.
So and DTAX rate at the time was like the number one accelerator in Thailand. So of course it would give us credibility to
Yeah.
go do more things afterward. So we're like, well, this is enough validation on the money side as well. So we need to do this now, and that's
Yeah.
that's basically what we did.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty amazing story from, I love how you describe it, how you go on a journey, how you see clarity. Like one of the biggest things I'm harping on these days on the podcast is there's so much noise in the market where people are just chasing capital, want to get money, right? They just, they're just copying. It's kind of a function of where we are in the business cycle with a lot of money slushing around and a lot of people just coming in for the wrong reasons. But and I love that $100 million question. I've actually used that framework that you gave me, asking my friends, and it changed a lot of their perspective. So it's a very powerful compass and tool to use. And just like how you figured out Trash Lucky, right? How you figured out how you want to, basically remove all the marine debris in the ocean. Um, and it was very organic, right? You were seeking clarity. You did the homework. You talked to people. You got validation. Talking to scientists who start from the beginning of the supply chain. I think scientists are very risk averse, and it's not an easy path. Which I still think there's some ideas that you could pursue in that area, but it's like at that point in time, it's going to take more effort. So high risk, high reward, right? So, but so you kind of went further down supply chain, and you organically grew through this idea, through experience, and actually trying and doing. And I think a lot of people kind of don't go through this journey, which I think I appreciate you telling the story, and it hopefully gives people context of how startups are born. And there's no one right way to do it. It's like how the framework we talked earlier before, how Rocket Internet just throws ideas on the wall, or there's venture builder ideas, or something like this. I think this is something that's very meaningful, and I guess for you, you wouldn't mind working on this for the rest of your life, then, right?
Yeah, if I can stop these materials from going into the ocean, right? I wouldn't change anything. I actually haven't been paid doing this. Uh,
Yeah, for two years
so,
now,
but
right?
it still keeps me. Yeah, luckily, like I exit my shares from delivery, right? So I have that savings, and of course from AMD as well, to fund the company for my lifestyle now. At this moment, I would do Trash Lucky as long as it's moving us to closer to that vision of oceans without plastic pollution.
Yeah. I think we're gonna have to do a whole separate podcast specifically on Trash Lucky and maybe doing a jam session. But I feel like I took too much of your time already, so I'll just move to the last two questions then. What is your expectation for your life going forward then for the next 10, 20 years? Because very similar to the university question, right? You were a young guy back in university. You had a very different view of what was going to happen, right? And you probably didn't expect you'd be building a recycling company now. What do you think about that question now?
I can only answer maybe like 10 years
Sure.
because maybe even 5 years my thought will change and
True.
maybe I don't want to do trash like anymore. Who knows? Anything can
Yeah.
happen. But
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like so at the time, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but in 10 years, like what I want to do is spend the next, like 10 years growing Trash Lucky, across the region. If you look Southeast Asia, uh, many of the countries in the top 10 ocean pollutant countries.
Yeah.
China's number one, Indonesia is number two, number three, I think is either Philippines or Sri Lanka. Number five and six is like I think Vietnam and Thailand, something like that.
Yeah.
So all those, like is Southeast Asia, and and Southeast Asians are like like yeah, Southeast Asians in general, they all like lucky draw, they all like lottery.
They do.
Um,
They do.
so yeah, so I feel like, if I can make Thailand work, there's no reason why I cannot make it work in other countries in Southeast Asia, especially
Mm.
given like the experience and connection that I've had working in those other countries, right?
Yeah.
Right now, it's just in the short term, the next year, it's just surviving through COVID
Yeah.
because
Yeah. It's been
COVID
brutal.
COVID actually makes it very difficult for us to like grow and validate models because people just deprioritize any activities. And of course, like trash becomes a very, very low priority, right?
Yeah.
People are worrying more about like health, safety,
Surviving.
vaccine, so exactly. So it makes it very difficult for us. But during the past 2 years, we were still able to launch new segments. So how do we test as many market segments as possible so that we learn? So we've been able to do that. We've been able to secure government grants to grow and to build technology. So albeit like a slow progress, but because of COVID, but we feel that we will survive through COVID and come out stronger. Like next year when things
Yeah.
get back to more like a normal pace, and I'm sure once that happens, we will grow very nicely. So then we can start expanding bigger in Bangkok, in Thailand, and across Southeast Asia over the next 10 years.
And essentially, do you have a metric that you're looking for? For example, X percentage of trash recycled specifically from the ocean, or reducing X percentage from the ocean for you to feel you've hit a certain scale and size where then you can then turn on monetization and it makes sense?
I have a similar metrics,
Okay.
um, not that exact one,
Yep.
but like in the next 2 3 years, we want like 200,000 people in Bangkok to be recycling with trash lucky.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, it would take a lot of work because
Yeah.
it's not like like download TikTok and upload your video on your mobile phone. It actually requires like us educating people to take actions of
you,
separating waste, right?
you say that, but maybe content marketing with influencers doing recycling might actually be the answer. It seems to be something that might work well in Southeast Asia. I don't know.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe we should get on TikTok.
Yeah, maybe you should. Okay, for my last question then is what is the most important thing you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey so far?
I guess probably like I think it goes back to the topic that we talked earlier as well about the journey to discovering trash ducky is having that clarity, right? Because entrepreneurship is difficult, man. When things go south, like if you're not into it, if you're not like
Yeah.
care about it enough, you'll probably just quit and go like find a full-time job. When COVID happens and all the schools that we had lined up for launching recycling programs just basically say, "Oh, we can't do it anymore because our school will close." If you're not
Yeah.
serious about this problem enough, you'll probably say,
Just quit.
"Okay, COVID happens. Let's pack our bags and go get a
Yeah.
full-time job." But if you have that clarity, if you're aligned, if you see the purpose, and you know that this is the reason that you're put on Earth, at least for now, or for the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever, um, you will probably keep on going and try to like problem solve and find creative ways to make progress. I'm not saying find clarity and just keep on banging your head against the wall. That's not what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Find clarity, but once you have that, then you would be able to set goals and small milestones, and even when you hit your roadblock, you'll try to be creative to go around that roadblock to make progress, and that progress will encourage you to tackle the next problem and build more progress. So yeah, that would be the key thing.
Yep. So having that clarity, tying it to an important mission, and not giving up is a perfect place to end. So thank you for sharing your story, your journeys, and your lessons. Much appreciated.
No problem.
Hey listeners, I hope you enjoyed listening to part 2 of Nattapak's journey. If you missed part 1, feel free to check it out to give you better context. If you enjoyed the content or learned something new, please share it with your friends or family or those who could benefit. And also give us a review on your podcasting platform of choice. So what did we learn today? I really loved the $100 million question that Nattapak asks. If you had $100 million today, right now, what problem would you be solving? Or would you even be solving a problem at all? I also recently heard another excellent reframing of this type of question. When you feel stuck, how would you feel about your choice or your decision 1 year from now? How about 3 years from now? What about 5 or 10 years from now? These are all variations of mental models and tools you could use to help get clarity that Nattapak talks about. I completely agree with Nattapak that more often than not, many people who are on the entrepreneurial journey get stuck in the weeds and dive into the abyss before having any clarity at all. Even if the clarity is wrong, doing some homework is better than going in blindly. More often than not, you will toil away in circles if you don't do the homework. I hope you got some clarity today. See you guys back here for next week's episode. EOA out.